Graceland's drawing room glows under lamplit warmth as Elvis Presley, weary from years of spotlights and sold-out arenas, strums the final chord of a quiet ballad. A hush falls, an intimacy as rare as dawn's first light. Then, from the front row, a small voice breaks the spell. "Mr. Presley, why do you believe in Jesus?" Silence stretches, taut and electric. He lays his guitar across his knee, the worn wood cool beneath his fingers. His eyes, shadowed by fatigue, tempered by memory, linger on the question that cuts deeper than any note. A smile flickers, gentle and knowing, and in that breath, the veil lifts. What follows will reshape more than a single evening. Tonight, the king lays down the crown and bares his soul, inviting us to see the man behind the legend. The firelight from the low-hanging chandelier danced across the worn rug as Elvis settled onto the edge of the high-backed chair, guitar resting on his knee like an old friend. The hush that followed the little girl's question, the one about why he believed in Jesus, still lingered in the air, thick as the incense from the altar behind him. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then lifted his head and began. "I was born in Tupelo," he said, voice soft and steady. "A cotton dust town where the sun rose hard and gold every morning, and where hope shivered in the air like a promise. We lived in a shotgun house my daddy called home. 2 rooms, 1 porch, a tin roof that rattled when the wind chased the rain across the fields. My mother, Gladys, she'd tuck me into the narrow bed each night and slip that old Bible under my pillow. Its cover was scarred, edges frayed, as though it had crawled through more storms than we ever would. Not to keep the devil away. I didn't know enough then to fear him. But so the stories inside might seep into my sleep." He paused, inhaling slowly, as though tasting each memory. Gladys believed that truth could settle into a boy's bones if he absorbed it in dreams. She said, "Elvis, you let that book be your whisper when the night is too quiet." I could almost hear her voice then, humming gospel hymns in the dark, the words echoing off peeling plaster. I'd lie awake, listening to her footsteps retreat down the hall, and wonder what place the Almighty might hold in a world that seemed so bruised already. He shifted, the chair creaking beneath him. Our church was the assembly of God, but Sunday mornings felt like a homecoming even if you didn't understand all the words. The choir, led by Mrs. Reynolds, a woman with a voice big as the river, wrapped every syllable in honey and fire. And when the preacher called for testimonies, I'd feel an itch under my skin, a longing rising in my chest. One Sunday, Pastor Chapman, an unassuming man with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes, told me to come forward. I was 9, and my throat tightened like a noose, but something in his smile gave me courage. I climbed those wooden steps, wrapped my small hands around the microphone, and sang a half-remembered chorus of Amazing Grace. The congregation leaned in, breathless, and I felt tears sting my cheeks before I understood what was happening. Their applause wasn't about talent. It was a kind of mercy shining straight at me. He closed his eyes briefly, voice thick with the recollection. When I was about 12, Gladys fell terribly ill. Pneumonia, they said. I remember the night I found her slumped in the chair by the stove, skin cold as blue steel, each breath a crack in her spirit. I cradled her hand and prayed, though I had never done so for myself. I begged God for the strength to keep her with me a little longer. I begged so hard that my voice cracked like dry wood. Come dawn, the fever broke, and her eyes fluttered open. I'm not bold enough to say prayer alone saved her, but I swore that night I'd never take faith for granted. He lifted the guitar and gently strummed a chord that lingered in the stillness. By the time I recorded at Sun Records in '53, I carried those memories with me. But the world I stepped into felt different. Spotlights and microphones, not pews and hymnals. I came home from that session expecting to be on top of the world, but instead, I felt hollow. The songs I poured my soul into sounded empty without the echo of that old church choir in my heart. I realized music and faith were pulling me apart in opposite directions. He let the chord fade. I never learned to pray on command. I never brought that Bible onto a television stage, fearing my faith would ring false under studio lights. And I never sang a gospel song in public unless I knew, or at least hoped, that each note came from a place of honest longing. He leaned forward, gaze drifting to the smoke-stained ceiling. But I kept that Bible under my pillow all the same, because I needed its witness more than ever. He lifted his head, eyes finding the little girl again, and offered a small, knowing smile. "That's why I believe in Jesus," he said, voice gentle but firm. "Because there are nights when only faith will see you through." He set the guitar aside, the final note reverberating like a heartbeat, and the room exhaled in wonder, ready for the next chapter of his story. When the applause finally faded and the room's hush settled like a soft blanket over the chairs, Elvis tucked his old Bible back beneath the pillow and allowed himself a moment's rest. Yet the following week, he would step into a very different arena, one dominated by spotlights, cue cards, and unyielding producers who believed that faith and showbiz belonged to separate orbits. It was early 1957, and the stage at the Grand Ole Opry felt less like sanctuary and more like a steel trap. The towering wooden pylons groaned under weighty microphone stands, while theater lights burned the air to a dry heat. Backstage, technicians muttered about channel time and high-stakes ratings, their cigarette smoke coiling around his shoulders as he changed from denim jacket into a glinting rhinestone suit. The moment he walked into the golden glare, the roar of the crowd was a tidal wave of expectation. But behind it, a small, persistent voice whispered prayer. "Son," his stage manager murmured, tugging at the collar of Elvis's white shirt, "don't you dare sing gospel for Johnny." The reference was clear. Gospel didn't trade in record sales or fan mail. God doesn't sell. Stick to what they came to hear. Elvis's throat tightened. He slid his fingers along the fretboard, recalling the lullabies he learned in the dim glow of Tupelo's small chapel, each hymn a lifeline cast in thankfulness. Yet as he stepped to the microphone that night, the producer's edict echoed in his mind. The band struck up the first bars of Hound Dog, a song he'd turned into his manifesto. He poured every ounce of his soul into each riff and vocal break, delighting the audience. But private, unspoken chords of "Peace in the Valley" thrummed beneath his chest. Years later, after the whirlwind of early stardom left him breathless, he faced perhaps his greatest act of defiance. It was 1965, in a plush RCA studio tucked behind dusty Nashville storefronts, when he announced he would record an entire album of gospel music. "How Great Thou Art." Colonel Parker shook his head so vigorously the brim of his hat bobbed. "This isn't the place for Bible talk," he whispered, voice low enough to rattle the soundboard. RCA executives frowned at budget sheets that listed choir fees and organ rentals alongside session musicians' salaries. But Elvis had made up his mind. In the chambered silence before the first take, he knelt beside the gleaming Bösendorfer grand piano, bowed his head, and muttered a quiet petition. When the lights clicked on, and the choir of 4 women in matching dresses lifted their voices, he matched them, rich, vulnerable, unstoppable. Take after take. He poured years of longing into each verse, his fingers quivering as they danced across the keys. By the time the final chord on "Where Could I Go But to the Lord" died away, even the producers had tears glistening in their eyes. Then, one humid Nashville afternoon in '67, after a show that had ended with thunderous cheers, a woman approached him behind the velvet curtain. Her hair was streaked with grief, her hands trembling as she handed over an envelope. "He listened to your gospel album every night in the VA hospital," she said, voice ragged. "My husband, he didn't live to return, but he believed he'd hear your voice again in heaven." Within hours, Elvis found himself clutching that letter in his dressing room, the scent of roses from a nearby vase mingling with the salty heat of his tears. He sank onto the couch and, for the first time, sang "Peace in the Valley" in private. Just him and the shadows, his voice cracking on the final note. He never performed that hymn on television. When Ed Sullivan invited him to sing any song he chose, Elvis picked "Don't Be Cruel," smiling at the audience while the cameras rolled. But late at night, he'd slip into the dim corner of his suite, cradle his guitar, and let "Peace in the Valley" rise again as a prayer unburdened by lights or scripts. Through those years, he carried two voices, one that dazzled the world, and one that knelt in whispered supplication. Each night he walked the line between them, heart thundering under bright beams, soul tethered to the quiet hymns of his childhood. And though no producer or television executive would ever coax that inner voice onto a live broadcast, it remained the beacon that guided him home whenever the show ended and the crowd's roar subsided. He settled into the green vinyl seat in his dressing room at the International Hotel, the hum of slot machines drifting through the thick walls. Outside, the desert air shimmered under neon signs. Inside, the lamplight glowed soft and warm. It was 1972, and Elvis Presley found himself the object not only of adoration, but of something altogether more private. Anonymous letters, folded and sealed with no return address, bearing questions that dug beneath the rhinestone veneer. The first note arrived, slipped under his dressing room door one evening after Proud Mary. His name, scrawled in blocky blue ink, stood alone on the envelope. He slid it with a key and drew out a single sheet of lined paper, words penned in a child's careful hand. "Dear Elvis, can God forgive me if I never believed in him? A friend." He stared at the question as though it were a riddle carved in stone. He'd received fan mail by the thousands, pleading for records, backstage passes, celamines, but never a plea so simple, so raw. He folded the note, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and stepped onto the stage. In the days that followed, more letters appeared, each a silent sermon, each unsigned. One asked why he sang about salvation when his own sermons never left the studio. Another wondered if his guitar strings hummed sweeter when he thought of heaven. These inquiries shadowed him through packed arenas, the Las Vegas Showroom, the Denver Coliseum, the Philadelphia Spectrum. And always, that first fragile question pulsed in his pocket like a heartbeat. But it was the third letter that struck him hardest. Delivered after a late-night sound check, it arrived folded twice, the paper coffee-stained, corners frayed. "Mr. Presley, I wrote the first note. I am in a rehab hospital. I listened to your voice on an old tape recorder. I never believed in God, but your songs make me think there is someone. Why did you choose to sing for him?" Elvis's throat went dry. He recalled the sterile corridors of that very center, white linoleum floors, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, where children fought diseases that no amount of applause could soothe. He remembered wishing he could soothe them with more than stage presence. He carried that letter for weeks, each night before he sang Burning Love, or You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. He fingered its creases, as though they might impart the answer. But the words eluded him. He had no sermon prepared, no gospel track in his set list. He was a king of rock and roll, not a preacher of absolution. By the time he boarded the Boeing for Aloha from Hawaii in February '73, the letter weighed on him like lead. In rehearsals at the Honolulu International Center, he sat alone at a keyboard, hearing the water's edge in his ears and the roar of the crowd still inside his mind. For weeks, he'd planned to close the broadcast with an American trilogy, a patriotic medley that wove Confederate lament, cowboy ballad, and Union anthem into something like a prayer for the fractured nation. Now, it felt like something more, a spiritual gesture, a single breath uniting old wounds. That night, as the cameras rolled live to cinemas around the globe, Elvis sang with that anonymous child in his heart. Each verse of the medley, Dixie, All My Trials, the battle hymn of the Republic, carried a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. The last refrain ended in a cathedral hush, and he let the echo hang before stepping back, his eyes misted with reflection rather than spectacle. 4 days later, he summoned Joe Esposito and slipped quietly from the hotel into a rented Cadillac. No cameras followed. He navigated honky-tonk bars and hotel corridors until he found the Children's Rehabilitation Center on Kuhio Avenue, a modest brick building flanked by rusty mailboxes. At the entrance, nurses in pastel scrubs recognized him in stunned silence. Word had not leaked. They half expected a publicist's entourage. Instead, he walked alone, carrying nothing but a microphone wrapped in a white handkerchief. In the common room, chairs pushed in neat rows, a single upright piano at the front. 40 or so patients gathered, some in wheelchairs, others leaning on crutches. He nodded to the director, who managed a whisper of introductions. Elvis raised his head, voice quiet yet unmissable. I'd like to sing something for all of you. Just one song. He sat at the piano and played the opening chords of He Touched Me. The melody wove a gentle arc through the fluorescent glare. When he began to sing, his voice trembled with unspoken compassion. He touched me. Oh, he touched me. And oh, the joy that floods my soul. In that sterile room, surrounded by children whose bodies betrayed their fragility, Elvis offered grace in the only way he knew, through song. No glitter, no grand gestures, just a man at a keyboard channeling hope into every note. Nurses dabbed tears. Some children reached out, fingertips brushing his. He sang each verse as though lifelines depended on it. When the final chord faded, silence descended so complete it felt sacred. Elvis rose, nodded, and slipped away. No photographs, no interviews, only the hush and the echo of what had been shared. Back on stage days later, under the dazzling lights of Aloha's encore show, he played an American trilogy once more. But this time, he was not just the king of rock. He was a man who had answered a child's question with the courage to sing of things beyond the stage. And in that unguarded act of faith, he found a truth no spotlight could ever fully reveal. The small wooden pews scraped and sighed beneath Elvis's boots as he slipped into the back of the modest Arlington Baptist Church. The single bulb suspended from the ceiling cast a dim, golden pool of light over patched plaster walls and a flaxen carpet worn thin in places. Outside, the Memphis summer breeze rattled the church's iron hinges. Inside, the hush was so complete that even the echo of his own heartbeat seemed loud. A week earlier, hidden beneath the glamour of his Hilton engagement, Elvis had attempted to learn Take My Hand, Precious Lord, in the cavernous rehearsal hall. The first chord had quivered like a fragile prayer. By the second verse, his voice had broken on the words, "Precious Lord, take my hand," and he'd closed his eyes, afraid that any more would tip the moment from performance into confession. When the band fell silent, Elvis rose and murmured, "If I sing this in public, then it won't be show business. It'll be prayer." He tucked the sheet music into his jacket pocket and walked away, shoulders rigid beneath the rhinestones. Now, in this humble sanctuary, he felt the weight of that unfinished song tug at his ribs. He'd agreed to perform here because the pastor's wife had written him, in trembling script, begging for a simple night of gospel. No cameras, no reporters, no flashbulbs, just believers gathering to lift their voices. Elvis had stipulated one condition: "Let me sing as one of you, not as the king." And so tonight, he arrived in plain black slacks and a soft cotton shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shirt untucked at the hem. He paused at the threshold of the small platform, a single step of polished oak, and ran a fingertip along the scarred edge of the upright piano. The instrument's varnish was chipped in places, and the keys bore slight discolorations from years of Sunday school lessons. He inhaled the scent of wax and must, an aroma so far removed from the heavy cologne backstage at Vegas, but it filled him with a steady resolve. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Elderly women in threadbare dresses, men clutching hymnals, children perched on the front row, faces expectant. A priest in a crisply ironed collar stepped forward and offered a silent nod. Elvis lifted his chin, stepped into the light, and took a seat on the piano bench. His first fingers hovered above the keys, hesitant as a new convert. Then, as if guided by an unseen hand, he pressed down on middle C, letting the note resonate through the quiet. He met the congregation's gaze, saw their hunger for something real, something unvarnished. He bowed his head and let his hands find the familiar chords of "Take my hand, precious Lord," the melody he had sung with his mother, the same lullaby that had soothed him through childhood nightmares. The first verse sprang from his lips in a hushed murmur. "Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn." His voice quivered at "I am worn," the tremor of unspoken fatigue weaving through every syllable. He closed his eyes and leaned into the melody, feeling the piano's gentle vibration under his knees, the soft creak of the bench, the congregation's collective breath held tight. On the second verse, "Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light," his vocal cord nearly snapped. His throat burned as years of exhaustion, doubt, and loneliness surfaced like ghosts. Somewhere in the back, an elderly man dabbed at his eyes. A boy near the front clenched his palms against the wooden rail, knuckles pale. Elvis swallowed hard and pressed on. By the third chorus, "When my way grows drear, precious Lord, linger near." His voice broke open, but he did not falter. He let the rawness shine, as though each cracked note offered a shard of truth. The hush closed tighter around him, wrapping him in the fellowship of shared vulnerability. At last, on the final refrain, he rose from the bench. His hands shook slightly as he eased the final chord to silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, gently, like the stirrings of dawn, the congregation began to sing the last lines along with him. Children's voices wavered, women's voices softened, and men bowed their heads in reverent unity. The melody dissipated into the hush, leaving behind a sacred stillness. Elvis stood alone at the piano, breathing deeply, face glistening with sweat and tears. The priest stepped forward and laid a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you, brother," he whispered. "He heard you tonight." Elvis offered a small nod, voice hoarse but resolute. I just followed his lead. He turned and walked down the church aisle, each step deliberate, feeling for the first time that he had sung not as an artist displaying skill, but as a man seeking grace. Backstage that night, as he removed his shoes and peeled off his shirt, Elvis pressed his hands to his chest, where the echo of the gospel hymn still pulsed. He retrieved the folded sheet music from his pocket and traced the title, "Take My Hand, Precious Lord," with trembling fingers. He realized that by daring to finish the song, he had bridged the gap between the stage and the sanctuary, between the man he showed the world and the boy he nursed in faith. He slipped the music into his Bible and placed both beneath his pillow. Outside, neon lights from the Strip filtered through the church's stained glass windows, casting fractured colors onto the aisle. Elvis lay back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, felt the perfect alignment of song and supplication, of spectacle and surrender. In the quiet, he offered one final prayer of thanks, that in singing what he could not perform before, he had invited the divine not just into his music, but into his soul. A dull ache behind his eyes had become Elvis's constant companion these past weeks. He trudged off stage in yet another sold-out arena, pulsing lights chasing him down the corridor, the hum of slot machines and late-night traffic mingling with the tail end of applause. Back in his tiny dressing room, he sank into the scarred leather chair by a single brass lamp, whose yellowed shade cast a shaky pool of light across his desk. His breath was slow and deliberate, almost mechanical, as though each inhale measured the distance between one heartbeat and the next. On the desk lay a sheaf of crumpled set lists, scribbled reminders of which gospel hymn he had allowed himself to sing in private. A half-empty glass of scotch, its amber surface catching the lamp's glow, and, beneath a heavy paperweight shaped like an angel, an envelope he recognized without opening. The envelope bore no stamp, no address, only a familiar looping scrawl. Elvis Presley. He tore it open with fingers stiff from exhaustion and tugged out the folded letter inside. Unfolding it slowly, he saw the neat, rounded handwriting of the girl from the rehab center, the one who heard him sing "He Touched Me" in that sterile hospital room. He had never asked her age. She wrote with the careful earnestness of someone accustomed to restraint, someone who knew every breath could be borrowed and every day a gift. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Presley, thank you for singing for us. I heard your voice and believed for the first time. But if God really hears you, why do you sound so sad when you sing about Him? Your friend, L." His chest tightened. He reread the question. Why so sad when you sing about Him? It wasn't an accusation, but a simple, piercing inquiry. He pressed both palms to his face and exhaled through clenched teeth. For a long moment, neither scotch nor fame could drown the weight of those words. Elvis remained mute for days. He skipped meals, lingered in darkened hotel rooms, while his team buzzed around him like indifferent flies. When Jerry Schilling found him in the back of the tour bus, pale under the glow of a single overhead bulb, Elvis confessed in a voice so low Jerry leaned close to hear. "Maybe I don't have answers. Maybe I'm still asking the same questions she asked me." In that admission, something shifted. A resolve flickered behind his weary eyes. If he could not give her an explanation from rehearsed monologue or gospel verse, he would speak his truth unvarnished. He gathered a sheet of hotel stationery, set a stub of pencil to the scratched desk, and began to write what he intended to say at his final concert. No safe platitudes, no rehearsed charm, only the vulnerability of a man laid bare. Lines flowed haltingly at first. I have walked this world with guitars and spotlights, but the hardest journey has always been through my own heart. His pencil lead shattered against the wood's groove. He scraped the broken point across the page and resumed, words splintering under his own doubt. The room was silent, save for the faint hiss of the air conditioner and the scratch of graphite on paper. At dawn, he set the pencil aside, leaning back to read what he'd written. He tore the pages up and started again, excising every line that sounded like a show. By midday, a single sentence remained, circled twice. I sing with sadness because I believe in hope. With every tremor in my voice, I testify that I still long for what I cannot fully hold. He copied that sentence twice more on a fresh sheet, folded it into his jacket pocket, and crumpled every other scrap. That evening, as he prepared for the concert's first notes, he turned to his stage manager and spoke plainly. No face shots, just my hands on the keys. It was not modesty. It was the necessity of anonymity. He wanted the audience to focus on the fragility in his words, not the contours of his jaw or the glitter of his costume. When the curtain rose, no bright floodlights addressed him. Only a narrow shaft of amber that illuminated the piano and the space around it. In the audience, thousands hushed, sensing that something in this finale would break the pattern of shock and awe showmanship. Elvis walked forward, hands slipping into his jacket to retrieve the folded thought. He paused, head bowed, the hush stretching out like a held breath. He spoke without raising his head. Years ago, a brave little girl asked me why. If God hears me, I sing of him with such sorrow. I searched for an answer in sermons and songs, but tonight I have none to offer, only this. I sing with sadness because I believe in hope. With every tremor of my voice, I testify that I still long for what I cannot fully hold. He placed the note on the piano's music stand, white against dark wood, and sat. His hands found the keys of Where Could I Go But to the Lord? Their first notes soft as a prayer. The melody unfolded, each chord a reverent step toward the heavens. He did not fight the tears that blurred his vision. Instead, he let them guide his fingers, each mistake and hesitation an echo of his own longing. Midway through the hymn, the auditorium lights dimmed further, and the cameras obeyed his request. No face to meditate on, only the pale illumination of his hands, cheeks glistening with tears. In the vast stillness, the audience heard something more honest than spectacle. A man laying his wounds at the foot of a promise. When the final chord faded, the silence lingered, unbroken by applause, unshattered by commentary. From the front row, a single figure rose. The girl from the letter, her pale face alight with empathy. She approached the edge of the stage and gently placed something small and heavy into Elvis's palm. He opened his fist to find a miniature Bible inscribed with her name, its cover worn and dear. He nodded, unable to speak, and bowed his head. Then he stepped back, allowing the hush to enfold them both. A shared moment of faith and fragility. A question met not with certainty, but with the courage to continue asking. The back room of the small Memphis recital hall felt more like a drawing room than a concert venue. Paneled walls, scuffed linoleum floor, mismatched folding chairs set in tight rows. A single overhead bulb swung gently, its filament flickering, casting long, wavering shadows. At stage right stood an upright piano, its lacquer chipped and a single Kauai logo peeling at the front. A lone microphone, suspended on a simple stand, waited beside a straight-backed wooden chair. It was late 1976, Elvis Presley's last public performance, arranged at his insistence as a private evening for close friends, family, and a handful of people whose lives he felt he still owed something to. The hall smelled of aged wood and waxed floors, with a faint hint of tobacco from the few guests who lingered in doorways, quietly greeting one another. No amplifiers roared, no dancers thrummed through strobe lights, just the soft rustle of program pages and the hush of anticipation. Elvis stepped into the narrow beam of light, dressed in charcoal trousers and a dark silk shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. His shoulders were slightly stooped, as if he carried unseen weight on his back, and the heavy line beneath his eyes suggested nights of restless thought. He paused for a heartbeat, letting the silence gather around him like a cloak, then rose and moved to the chair. The audience, no more than 60 people, fell still, their faces eager but uncertain what to expect. He settled onto the seat, hands resting lightly on his knees. The spotlight shifted, illuminating the piano's worn keys. He reached forward, pressed a middle C, and listened to its solitary ring. Then he leaned toward the microphone, voice low and intimate. "A little girl once asked why I believe in Jesus," he began. His tone was conversational, as though he spoke across a kitchen table rather than a stage. "I searched for the answer in stories of old, in the songs I learned as a boy, but the truth I found came in the darkest hours. When pain threatened to break me, I discovered I wasn't alone." He paused, swallowed, and the room held its breath. "That's all I have to say." Without another word, he slid from the chair and crossed to the piano. His fingers lingered above the ivory, then pressed down, drawing forth the opening chords of "Where Could I Go But to the Lord?" The melody began as a whisper, miles removed from the thunderous crescendos of Vegas showrooms. He sang each line as though he were praying, voice husky with lived experience. "He's the lifter of my head. He's the light upon my path. When I'm weak, he makes me strong." His breath caught on the last note of the first verse, and he paused, head bowed. A single bead of sweat trailed down his temple into his shirt collar. His hands trembled as they moved into the second verse, yet each chord rang true, resonating through the stillness. Somewhere near the back, the faint creak of a chair echoed, a reminder that this was no polished performance, but a shared moment of vulnerability. By the time he reached the bridge, "Ours is not to question why, but to trust in the one on high." His voice wavered, breaking like thin ice underfoot. Tears welled, and he closed his eyes, shoulders quivering. The silence deepened until it felt thicker than tissue. No one dared applaud. The hush stretched, reverberating against the bare walls. He finished the final refrain with a soft exhalation and let the last chord drift into nothing. The microphone picked up the soft hum of his breathing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, leather-bound book, a child's Bible, its cover stamped with a young girl's name, the pages lovingly dog-eared. He held it aloft, eyes glistening, and nodded once, as if acknowledging every question, every doubt laid bare that night. A girl toward the front, someone he had met years before, rose and walked forward on unsteady legs. She placed her small hands on his palm and pressed the Bible into them. Elvis bent his head, a single tear slipping down his cheek. He placed both books on the piano, gathering the moment in silence rather than words. Afterward, there was only the shuffling of feet as guests rose, some pressing forward in quiet hope of words or blessing. But Elvis slipped through the side door without a final bow. He vanished into the Memphis night, leaving behind an echo that no spotlight could ever replicate. He never performed again. Months later, After news of his passing in August 1977 spread around the globe, a small silver microcassette was discovered in his Graceland study, tucked beneath a stack of handwritten lyrics. The label read, simply, "Last Word." When played, it revealed his unguarded voice in the hush of an empty room. "Maybe I was a voice," he murmured, "but not the answer. But Lord, thank you that someone cared enough to ask." The tape clicked off, leaving only a lingering stillness. He was never a preacher. He was never a saint. But perhaps that is why, when he spoke of faith, his belief sounded so unmistakably real.